hybrid. Yeah. The hybrid. Yeah. The hybrid. Yeah. The hybrid.
10 years ago this November, Massachusetts voters passed Question 4 and legalized adult use cannabis. I didn't write that law. I didn't pass it. In fact, the voters did. But in the run-up to that vote, I was working for the state treasurer's office, and a big part of my job was making sure that Massachusetts was ready for whatever the voters decided. What would a regulated market actually require? What would it take to license it, to test it, to tax it, and to enforce it? We did that homework before a single ballot was even cast. And when I was eventually appointed as the agency's first executive director, that preparation was actually the foundation we built on. The regulations, the licensing system, the track and trace system. It was the first adult use stores to open east of the Mississippi. Here we are a decade later, and Massachusetts has hundreds of licensed businesses, thousands of employees, billions in regulated sales, and real tax revenue flowing to the state and, of course, our host communities. And this November, it's back on the ballot. There's a repeal question that's been qualified. It survived a myriad of challenges, and if it passes, Mass would actually become the first state in the country to dismantle a functioning, regulated adult use market by popular vote. It's not a think piece. It's not a live campaign. It is a live campaign, and happening right now in my home state. Here's what I keep coming back to. We built it, so leave it alone is not a winning argument. The repeal side is pointing at real frustrations with how legalization's played out. Complacency is what loses ballot campaigns. And that's the fight our guest is in the middle of today. Ryan Dominguez leads the Massachusetts Cannabis Coalition, and defeating this repeal effort has become the central focus of his work. Today, he and myself and Erik, we're going to walk through exactly what the ballot question does, what yes and no actually means, what survives, what doesn't, who's behind the effort and how it got this far, what passage would mean for businesses, employees, municipalities, consumers, and possibly even patients, and why every other legal state should be watching. Because if this works here, it's not going to stay here. But before we bring Ryan in, Erik, you and I were both handed voter-approved cannabis laws and told to figure them out, make them work. You, of course, in Maine, and me here in Massachusetts. So tell me, when you heard Massachusetts, I would argue one of the most established markets in the country, had a repeal actually qualify for the ballot, what was your first reaction? Was this a stunt that's going to go nowhere, or did part of you actually think this could pass?
Yeah, I think I wouldn't say shocked, but surprised, but not shocked. It's interesting. I mean, when this happened and we heard about it earlier this year, it was both Maine and Massachusetts had the chance of having a ballot question to repeal.
That's right.
Those ballot questions, and what I built in Maine and what you built down in Massachusetts. And it's just interesting. And really, I'm glad that we have Ryan here to talk about this, because we've certainly been talking about this behind the scenes. We've brought it up on a few past podcasts. And really, what does it mean specifically for Massachusetts? Why Massachusetts now? What does it mean for other states that are considering legalizing? I mean, we have like Virginia, like states keep moving in this direction. All this stuff happening at the federal level, it just seems like everything's coming to a head, and it's interesting. And I want to get Ryan's take of what he's seeing on the ground, what he's hearing, what his sense is of the yes and no votes, the different groups, what they're advocating for. I'm just really excited for this question. The one caveat is you implemented the ballot question. We took it to our legislature and rewrote it, made it much better, and then implemented it.
Yeah,
so,
we did the same.
Who knows? Oh, well, yeah, to a certain extent, that's true.
Yeah, no, but I think that's the thing is, look, first off, let me admit, I hate ballot questions, period. I think it's an awful way to make law.
We've also had this question,
Yeah, and so never a big fan of ballot questions for that reason. It's a yes or no to a nuanced question. But, and I should also welcome back to the hybrid podcast, everybody. I've neglected to mention that at the outset. But this is also why I think you and I started this podcast, was to have these sorts of questions batted around and to discuss them. And so to Ryan, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for giving us some of your time. I know you're a busy guy these days, especially. But we also want to give you this platform and have a conversation with you for a lot of reasons. One is because there's, I think it's 9 ballot questions coming up in November, and that's obviously in and of itself an overwhelming aspect. You're going to be on page 2 or 3 of a ballot,
all the way at the bottom.
Yeah, when someone gets there, we obviously want to give you a sense or an opportunity to talk about what a yes vote is, what a no vote is. But also, I mentioned too, you're the head of the Mass Cannabis Coalition, and would love to obviously talk to you about that and how you came to that organization, but what that organization has been doing for the past, year plus, since this ballot question's been, first it was a rumor, then it was possible, then they're all of a sudden, holy shit, they've got money. It's real. And I obviously was privy to some of those conversations, but, again, just welcome, but thank you so much for giving us some of your time to talk about this ballot question, why it's important. But, I want to give you the space to talk about the Mass Cannabis Coalition, you, Ryan Dominguez, how you came to it. But also let me just compliment the work that you've done with MCC to organize an industry that is not easy to corral at a time when a lot is at stake. So Ryan, welcome. But maybe if you wouldn't mind for our listeners, who's Ryan and what is the MCC? And then looking forward to diving into this.
Yeah, definitely. And Shawn, Erik, I just really appreciate the opportunity to share what we're doing in Massachusetts, because I think it doesn't have just effects here on our program, but it has long-lasting effects for legalization across the country. So I think this is a very timely conversation for us to be having going into the fall. So just to give you, a little bit of the resume, a little bit of the background on how I got to kind of leading this Stop the Repeal campaign. So I started my career kind of like you, Shawn, like within the State House up at Beacon Hill in Boston, Massachusetts. I used to work for a local state representative in Boston. Her name is Rep. China Tyler. We represented areas of Boston, including the Roxbury neighborhood, the Dorchester neighborhood, areas that had been heavily impacted by the war on drugs, the failed war on drugs at that. And so we did a lot of criminal justice reform. And when I was working for her, the first adult use stores were starting to come online. So we were right in the mix of the legislation that was getting passed to create the Cannabis Control Commission, create the first in the nation social equity program, et cetera. And so I think that's really where my focus came in on the cannabis side of things. I saw the social equity program as this new program that could really impact the same constituents that we were working to help through legislation, through constituent services every day. And so what I saw in that law was an opportunity to undo the harms of the war on drugs, make sure that leaders can come out of, incarceration and actually enter into this industry as either leaders and as employees, but also as entrepreneurs. And so I didn't see too much teeth in the law for social equity programs. I don't know if there was any real outside of the positive impact plans that were required of businesses on an annual basis to talk about what they were actually going to do for the communities that they were operating in, anything that would really get them to hire people who have been formerly incarcerated for cannabis or push them forward to undo these different harms. So I left her office and I created a nonprofit organization called Mass Cultivate Ed. And what we did in that organization was basically go around to different communities that had been harmed by the war on drugs. And we recruited folks to help them to clear their records of past offenses, both cannabis and non-cannabis related. I think, we've all heard the stories of trumped up charges that people had from getting pulled over for cannabis, whether that was, resisting arrest and assault on a police officer, things that the police department was just putting onto charges to try to get something to stick. And so we worked a lot with local legal aid organizations to help people clear their records. And then we also helped to set up a lot of the first cannabis education programs at local community colleges across Massachusetts. So teaching people people actually like what it means to work in a retail dispensary, what it means to work in cultivation, a little bit about the science of it and how it affects the body. And we would then transition those folks into the industry by getting them hired at various, dispensaries and cultivation facilities. And so that really started my process, I think, of cannabis policy advocacy. Even with the laws that we created and the social equity program, there were still a lot of barriers that were in place for these folks to enter in. And so, did some advocacy with some former commissioners to try to change some of the suitability requirements and that kind of thing. And that would be on the background checks in order to get an employee badge, et cetera. And so at that point, I think I started realizing this industry is maturing at such a fast pace that now we're starting to get to an oversaturation, oversupply type of market. And there was a lot of layoffs. There was a lot of businesses that ended up closing, and those are the same people that were hiring my folks. And so some of the cannabis industry partners I was working with, saw the advocacy that I was doing on behalf of our organization and, asked me to kind of come in and help with a few different issues, specifically around municipalities and host community agreements and that kind of thing. And so, we were able to pool a few resources from a few different companies, got that, to get us a lawyer to fight back against some municipal attorneys, et cetera. And we're able to, exactly, the lawyers always making things messy in our industry. And so, I think at that point, we saw the power of coming together as an industry. We can find these different issue topics that we all care about, that we're all impacted by, and just try to find ways to push forward on that. And that's how the MCC kind of got started. We really launched publicly, I think in 2024, was when we started from like a 6 or 7 member organization. And now we're up to 103 members in our organization. So grew pretty quickly, pretty fast. I think, the biggest thing was there wasn't really a place for people to, regardless if you're like a big MSO, a delivery operator, a testing lab, to kind of come together and try to see, can we create a unified voice that the legislature and the CCC can kind of listen to? And it was tough going. And, I think there's been some bad experiences with trade associations in Massachusetts. And I know this is probably a common theme in different markets that have come online across the country. But I think just, giving people the platform to voice their concerns really showed us that we have a lot in common in terms of what we're facing day to day. And we were actually able to pass a landmark bill just this year, which was, taking 2024, 2025, and finally in 2026 being able to pass this legislation that restructured the CCC, increased our purchase limits from 1 ounce to 2 ounces, increased our license cap from 3 to 6, among a host of other things. So I think that all just kind of came about because our industry was at a point where nobody else was listening to them. They didn't feel like they were getting a lot of resources, and they had to come together to, not everybody thought this was the perfect bill, but I don't think anybody who knows policy will say, if you come out with a perfect bill, it's actually a perfect bill. I think, everybody got something out of it, and we were able to kind of push our industry forward to a better maturity. So I think that's, me in a nutshell, what we are as the MCC. We're an advocacy organization trying to support our businesses, and now we're out here trying to defend them.
Well, that's an incredible story. It's very familiar at the very beginning, right? Like you're working at the State House, you get cannabis in your portfolio, and it just kind of spirals off. I think Shawn and I can both kind of fall into that bucket. But it sounds like what you were doing with Mass Cultivated Ed is like a whole nother episode of this podcast, because we'd love to hear about that work. And then it's incredible what you've done with MCC. And then you also brought up something that I think we need to discuss as we get into the campaign conversation is around all of the work that your legislature did this last session to change, modernize, build in efficiencies, and make it a more effective program. So it's not just we're backtracking legalization, we're like actively backtracking on all the updates, improvements, I guess, depending on who you talk to. That was just a couple months ago as well. But before we get into that discussion, I want to ask a similar question Shawn asked at the top of the episode here to you. I don't know if my answer was that great, but Ryan, when did you first catch wind of this campaign? What was the initial reaction that you had? but also as you started to socialize it with the members in MCC? What was the vibe? What was the temperature in the room? Or was it still like, this is not really happening?
Yeah, so we first got the report when they filed their petition with the Attorney General's office last year. I think it was around the summertime, late summer when we first saw that. And everybody thought, hey, they have to collect 78,000 signatures in that first round. And everybody was like, nobody is actually going to sign on to a petition that repeals our adult use cannabis market. We were right in the midst of like passing this, like you said, landmark legislation. It's already generated so much revenue and tax revenue for both cities as well as the state. And I think there's a lot of folks in Massachusetts that are now actively going to dispensaries to purchase products. And so it's become ingrained in kind of our life here as Massachusetts residents. And so I think the industry, the voters, nobody really thought that it was going to happen. And then once we started seeing that, oh, there's a lot of money that is pouring into this, and they got about $2 million from, our friends over on the national level, Smart Approaches to Marijuana, SAM, to bankroll getting onto the ballot, then we have to really start taking it seriously, because, that doesn't just come out of nowhere if they don't think they actually have a chance to get onto the ballot. And so with them hiring these out-of-state signature gatherers and going out into communities, and obviously we've seen all the reports and like the videos of folks who were actually getting lied to about what this cannabis ballot question actually does, then we started seeing it as a real threat. If folks were getting duped into signing it and how real the resources that they had behind them were, then we had to start taking it seriously.
Yeah. And I want to frame that a little bit too, though, Erik, just to sort of, because Ryan's right, like this, the ballot access process to get a question on the ballot in Massachusetts is really steep, and it's steep out of the gate. Anyone can file a petition to the AG's office, and that process really is paperwork based. But then to really get on the ballot, you've got to go hit pavement and get a percentage of the last election or voter total from the last biennial statewide election. And in this instance, it was close to 80,000 signatures. And for folks to like understand outside of Massachusetts that haven't been either petitioned to sign a nomination paper or something, it's a wet signature. Like you need to go to a grocery store and get people to sign up. You need to basically just go where people congregate and get people to sign up. You've got to go to events or festivals and have a table or a booth, and every politician that wants to get on a ballot has to do it, but every question that wants to put a question before the voters needs to do it as well. And so that was always a steep hurdle, and there's really well-funded campaigns that haven't succeeded in that. But to Ryan's point, and I want to talk more about that, there were some shenanigans as well, potentially, that might have either compelled or otherwise led to some folks signing. And there's also been recent questions for other candidates around, did people actually sign this thing? So sorry to interject. I just wanted to give some context to our listeners that that sort of that threshold of like they've hired a firm to go get signatures is kind of the, oh shit, okay, this is real. And then to your point, if they're going to spend $2 million to try to get on the ballot, they don't stop spending then, right? Like you don't go through that effort to just take a chance on a ballot. They're going to campaign too, and they are. So 100%. Sorry, Erik, I realized you might have had a question or two. I just wanted to context that a little bit.
No, I mean, that's helpful. And you kind of went down the route that I was going to go. I mean, I remember when they started collecting signatures up here in Maine, I think there was some mischief, riffraff happening. I don't remember where I read that, but
Can we just call it fraud? Can we just like call it what it is? Like there was some fraud happening. Like,
yeah. But let's fast forward, because the ballot's on the question. Shawn brought up the fact that there's 9 ballot questions. You guys are number 8, so that's something that you have to take into account in whatever strategy you put together, understanding how people are gonna work themselves down the ballot. But now, I think a good place to base ourselves is what exactly is the question? What are folks voting on if they vote yes? What are folks voting on if they vote no? Because I think the three of us have enough experience here to understand like 2 or 3 sentences is a very big lift for people to understand exactly what the implications are, all of the moving pieces that need to happen afterwards, all of the different stakeholder groups that are going to be impacted. It's really kind of, Shawn and I have gone back and forth about how we feel about ballot questions. I think there are some good pieces to ballot questions, but this is certainly a weakness or a con when you're talking about ballot questions. But help our listeners better understand. If you're in Massachusetts, you're a Massachusetts voter, you go and you vote yes or you vote no. What are they actually voting for? And two, do you think they have enough information based off of the framing of the language to understand what they are voting for?
Yes, and you're 100% correct. There's only like a few sentences that they have to explain what this ballot question will actually do. And there's a lot of the unintended consequences of the way that it's worded that are not clear to the voter. And so for question 8 specifically, this question will repeal adult use cannabis. And that's what it, very high level will do. I think it also, it changes the possession limits, which we have increased since we passed this last legislation from 1 to 2 ounces for purchase, but also in terms of possession, up to 3 ounces in terms of possession before you're actually criminalized for the possession of cannabis. And so this knocks it down back to 1 ounce. And so all of the work that we did in the legislation will go away. And then also recriminalizes things like home grow. And so, there's a few things that are written into here that are not actually explained. And one thing that I really want to kind of harp on is that getting rid of the adult use cannabis market is also going to devastate our medical program for a lot of the patients. The way that our program was set up from the onset when we converted from medical to adult use, it had this vertical integration requirement, which means that you have to control the whole supply chain. You basically have to have your own cultivation that grew it, your own product manufacturing to produce the products, and your own retail to sell those products out of. And that didn't change when we converted over into adult use cannabis. So if you're thinking about today and how many folks are actually in the medical market and actually survived all of the oversaturation, oversupply, and market dynamics, there are very few and far between. Even with some of the changes that we put into legislation to remove those vertical integration requirements, there's actually a very specific exclusivity period for social equity that only social equity businesses can access that change for the next 2 years. So if you're looking at this ballot question and we repeal adult use cannabis, it's not like everybody can just convert over into medical because of this exclusivity period and kind of that delay of implementation. So we're going to lose about 80% of the market. If you think about, 10% is like, the vertically integrated folks, 10% like social equity, and just using broad numbers just to make it easy. And so there's going to be a lot of folks who are not going to have access to medical. They're going to have medical deserts across the state, and there's only going to be a few operators left that are going to be able to survive something like this.
And that's still a challenge today on the medical side as far as access. And so the change that the legislature just did, hopefully, is able to expand access through that retail, especially because, like you said, the vertical integration aspect, no place was sort of totally bare, but there was definitely like some pockets of it wouldn't sustain a medical operator. You get down toward the Cape or out in Western Mass, and there's just sort of, again, those pockets. But I also imagine the medical access or medical market is supported in large part by the sort of the scale in the overall market of cannabis, right? So if I'm a medical operator, but I can also then enjoy 3 retail adult use, that supports my entire supply chain from a logistics standpoint, from a cost scalability, just sort of, is the juice worth the squeeze in this market? Yes, because I'm both. So if you take out a good portion of my business through adult use, what's to suggest that I'm going to stick around as a medical operator in a market that, one, doesn't have popular support or public support, but then also, is it justifiable where Erik mentioned earlier, Virginia just legalized adult use. Like, I'm going to put my resources elsewhere. And I think some of these businesses are going to make that market choice. So sort of a lot to take away from that soapbox again. But the takeaway being, I'm glad you kind of addressed it, which is that unintended consequence of voting, thinking like, I'm a home grower. I don't care about dispensaries. Like, screw it, I'm going to vote yes. Well, you just lost your home grow legality as well. So thank you for obviously doing the work to educate voters, but To answer Eric's question from earlier, I would say a lot more education is still necessary on the implications, and that unintended consequence aspect is, I don't think all the three of us combined would probably take a long time to just pull that thread and say, well, what happens here? What happens with real estate? What happens with some of these gateway cities that have, like a Fitchburg, that's really gone all in on cannabis? If you think the Industrial Revolution was hard on some of these gateway cities, losing cannabis is far more abrupt. So,
yeah. And I mean, if you think about currently kind of the state of our economy, and it's, the state of some of these gateway cities that have lost a lot of their manufacturing jobs and, kind of
Exactly.
industries, cannabis actually kind of came in and helped to revitalize a lot of these main streets. It drove a lot of business to the restaurants, the stores, etc.
Exactly.
People were moving to these different cities and towns. And I don't think that a lot of people really understand how much benefit the cannabis industry is providing outside of just that economic benefit, but also like with the tax revenue and the support that they're providing. It's been 10 years now, probably $2 billion in total tax revenue, about, 300 million last year. And so with that said, there's a lot of programs that are getting funded through cannabis, whether that is substance addiction services, our transportation system, the school building authority, which helps to refurbish schools, etc. And so there's so many different programs that are getting wiped out if we remove the adult use program, and people don't know about that because it's not actually written into the way that the question is presented to folks.
Because it's question 8. Yeah.
Yeah,
Of
So-
exactly.
In thinking about this, you have a lot of challenges here, right? Because again, Massachusetts voter goes in, doesn't understand the full extent of what a yes vote would mean to repeal. I mean, we highlighted that they have pathways for individuals to transfer to med, but it sounds like they're just for social equity operators for a certain amount of time, which I didn't know. It takes away home grow. You're talking about reversing the legislation that we just passed a couple months back. Obviously, tax revenue goes away, the lost jobs. But my point being is, like, an average voter is not going to understand all of those impacts with a yes vote. So in the work that you're doing right now on the campaign, where are you pushing your resource? Like, what are the talking points? What are we highlighting, and what are you seeing that actually moves people to better understand the impact on their vote, and so they have better judgment, or not? I shouldn't say better judgment. They have a better understanding of what the true impact of their vote is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, number one is education. So that has been kind of our number one focus to date.
Just wholesale. Here's what you need to know. Kind of like the conversation that we just had.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
These are going to be all of the impacts. These are all the folks that, are actually getting positive benefits from the cannabis industry. So we have like local mayors that are coming out on our side. There's different industries like the Retailers Association. There's realtors. Like, if you think about the cannabis economy, we're providing a resource for like HVAC, for lawyers, for accountants. So like, there's all of these different people who are benefiting from our industry that are going to get impacted. So even if you're not in the cannabis industry, we're trying to explain to folks, like, your brother, your dad, your sister are like in some of these other industries that are actually being able to benefit from that. And so really it's been focused on a field operation, trying to get out and like let folks know about what this real threat will happen. So, getting out to the different community organizations, the labor organizations, and all of these different folks to try to see if we can get their membership to understand, what it really means to remove the adult use market. And then also we have to combat a lot of the fear mongering that we know is out there. There's a lot of misinformation around cannabis. And so just trying to explain to folks that, if you remove the adult use market, some of the things that you're fearful of are not going to go away. If anything, they're going to get worse. And trying to explain to them that like a regulated market for cannabis is never going to be perfect, like especially at this early stage. But the best way for us to continue addressing some of the, concerns that you have is for us to create better policies, get better research and data to create better policies. And so that's what we're trying to explain to people, are that, it's not about removing the adult use market and then all of a sudden all of these things go away. It actually gets worse because we're pushing people into the illicit market. And so those are the types of things that we're out here talking to folks about.
So help me understand. I'm sorry. I just follow a question to that, Shawn.
Yeah.
So when you say we got to get out there and educate, I mean, what are we doing? Maybe, I don't know if it's your budget, TV, you have your social media, but do you have a team of canvassers out there knocking on doors? Are you doing like a train the trainer, finding these partner organizations where they can add you to a script when they go door knocking? Like how are we one step further there?
Yeah, definitely. So we have a field operation that's getting in place. We've hired folks who can kind of go out and get our dispensaries to actually be these points that mobilize like all of the patients and consumers who are kind of coming through the doors, and letting them know that, all of this goes away if they do not go out to vote no on 8 come November. And so, it's also going to things like the Democratic Convention and like talking to folks who are outside of our industry, setting up a table and like getting them to sign on to our pledge cards, which says, hey, I'm going to actually vote no on 8 come November. And so, there's a lot of meeting people where they're at, going to all the different community events that are happening throughout the summertime, whether that is a activation that is getting sponsored by a cannabis company, a farmer's market, etc. And then also just trying to get out there and do more on the earned media front, on the social media front, doing podcasts like this one. I do think that at the end of the day, it will come down to some of our advertising. It's a tough thing for us to ask. I think a lot of the struggling businesses to fund multi-million-dollar ad campaigns, but that's what wins ballot initiative campaigns, is like, how can we actually get out to as many voters as possible on TV, on social media, on the streaming platforms that they're on. And that's how we can get some more, quick education of the voters.
One of the points you just made at the end there is really compelling, and I think it's worth reminding, especially some of our listeners to, and it opens the door to a couple different discussions, and I guess we'll see where we head, but which is these businesses that are I'm sure you and many others are asking to join this campaign and support the work that needs to get done. They've had it rough from the very beginning, as far as like, these guys are not flush with cash. This is not an affluent industry that is just, we talked about the billions of dollars and the thousands of jobs, and we haven't talked about 280E. We haven't talked about sort of the unlicensed competition that's sort of competing with them through some of the hemp stuff. And like, these guys are feeling a lot of pressure from a lot of different areas, but it's important to keep in mind that on a good day, a cannabis business is taxed through 280E at a rate that any small business would fight to survive under that pressure. And so the expectation shouldn't be that these businesses are going to be able to defend themselves because they could just cut the check. It's that simple. And I think that's why, when thinking about other states and why should I care about this, like, why should I get involved in Massachusetts from their campaign standpoint? One is because every little dollar is going to help. But we mentioned earlier, you could be defending this in your state next. It's not going to stop here. The money that's coming in to fight in favor of Question 8 is not originating from Massachusetts. In fact, we don't always know where it originates from, because they're a bit of a organization that, by all means, it sounds is perfectly compliant. It doesn't mean that it's right or appropriate or transparent, to say the least. So I feel for these local businesses that have been fighting for their existence, fought in 2016 to pass a question that a lot of the political operation or apparatus did not support. So they've sort of been fighting that. They've worked since then, as you noted earlier, over the last 10 years to build credibility with policymakers such that they could actually finally start to see some improvements for the spirit or sort of the environment that they live within. Increased license cap, the increased sales, daily sales limit. All those things have been hard to come by, but you finally got them, and then shit, like, now we're back on the ballot. So one question I actually have, though, is what cannabis has done in my history and my experience is to ask people to vote yes. Support us. Vote yes in favor of cannabis. So I think we've been conditioned in Massachusetts, at least when it comes to cannabis, I'm for it. I voted yes for medical marijuana. I voted yes for decrim. I voted yes for medical marijuana. I voted yes for adult use. And now part of your effort is to say, vote no. And this sort of piggybacks off of Erik's curiosity, which is like, how do you educate the voter that just sees cannabis on the ballot and goes, yeah, I'm for that. Yep. And so I'm sure your education is to remind people, vote no on question 8. I see obviously you've got some swag too, which is great. But how else can you, I guess, recondition that voter to now vote no on cannabis?
Yeah. And I think that's what kind of shows how real of a threat this is that there are going to be people who are confused and think that voting yes is voting for our side of cannabis, of keeping the regulated market. And especially if their other side can use their tremendous resources that they do have. I mean, they spent $2 million just to get onto the ballot on the first round. They probably spent even more money in these subsequent rounds. And I think in some of the things that we've heard, they have about $20 million that they can potentially deploy here in Massachusetts. And so there's opportunities for them to push forward and confuse folks that, oh, yes is actually helping cannabis. It's making it safer. It's doing these different things. And so one is just like, we have to get out there and combat that message. If they're putting out TV ads, we need to have TV ads. If they have social media, similarly. And I think the one way we can do it is just through repetition. I think, our dispensaries are probably our biggest advocate right now. I mean, we have over 400 stores in Massachusetts, and those are seeing thousands of customers every single day. And so it's like, can you educate them, make them a champion of no on 8, and then get them to get their family members to understand that they need to vote no on 8, etc. And so that's why all of our stores have like our materials. We've trained their bud tenders how to talk to each of the patients and customers to continuously have that conversation with the same customers that are coming in. And then also lean on the resources that our dispensaries already have. There's billboard advertising that's allowed in Massachusetts. Can we get up on some of the billboards? So when you're driving by, you see no on 8 means keeping weed legal, and like just trying to like nail it down in people's heads. And so I think it's just a continuous thing. And then also we need to find, these surrogates, these other champions outside of that. And that's why I mentioned like the mayors, these potential like celebrities that have got into cannabis, different folks that people trust and want to like learn from, and get them to all be repeating that no means, voting for keeping recreational cannabis legal. And so it's not an easy task because people are conditioned in this way to vote yes, but I think again, it's just going to be repetition.
Yeah. And I think the branding is already underway, and it's really well done. So keep that work up. And again, we'll, I think, do our best to reinforce that as well.
So, Ron, I want to ask you about the opposition here. So the yes campaign, the yes folks, and it's a 2-part question. One, I'd be interested to better understand what their messaging is. What right now, what are they focused on? What are they telling people? What do you think might be persuasive from their end? But also, I think the three of us have been around these regulated programs for a while. We understand that they're not perfect. There are things that we could be doing better. But that doesn't mean let perfect be the enemy of the good, right? So I'm interested in the yes folks, some of their concerns, some of their talking points. Which ones are actually legitimate, but it doesn't mean we go as far as shutting down a $1.5 billion industry with all of the impacts that we discussed earlier. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And, I think there are a lot of things that they're pushing that are nonsensical, but I think there are things that, we share as a cannabis industry in terms of trying to improve. And I think there's a lot of research and data that still needs to happen around, the public health effects of using cannabis. Specifically, I think they try to aim at high potency products and like their cause in terms of mental health conditions and things like psychosis. And that's really what they're leaning into. And I don't think in the same way that, fighting against rescheduling is not going to get us the research and data that we need to address some of those issues. I don't think removing the adult use market is going to get us there either. So I think they do a lot of fear mongering on like what these products can do for a developing mind, people who are under 21. And I think that, folks don't really understand that our products coming from the regulated market, you have to go through 2 ID checks to get any products. Like we have these advertising and packaging rules that make it so that you're not advertising to kids. And so there's a lot of those types of arguments that they try to make around public health, getting it into kids' hands, et cetera, that I think we share the same concerns and we can legislate our way to stronger kind of barriers and protections. Removing the adult use market isn't going to solve any of those things, to your question.
I find that, I want to be respectful here. I find that, I find that rich. I find it a little bit crazy because a lot of those things that they're saying they're advocating for the removal of the adult use program, I think, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, we do have hard data that suggests states with regulated programs are actually scoring better on like youth, like age of adoption.
Yeah, exactly.
Or so it just, that's the part that's frustrating. Is like you're kind of like advocating or you're in a position against yourself on some of these things. So they're leaning into the public health psychosis and
the stuff that they're leaning into, frankly, some of it has nothing to do at all with the legal adult use market as well. So
so what are
like or the illegal adult use market itself would acknowledge and say like, yeah, we know we exist either like to fix that, which is youth access and things like that, but also things like the high potency stuff or the lack of sort of the consumer confidence in potency sometimes because of some lab issues that they've read about. And I think the legal adult use market, both in Massachusetts and everywhere, would say, yeah, we got to get lab testing squared away. We've been asking for that from our lawmakers and regulators since we came into existence. We agree that kids shouldn't have access to it. That's why we ID check twice and have security cameras and frosted windows and can't advertise in places. And so I think like to listen to the arguments of some of the proponents of the ballot question, generally the prohibitionists, I think about this stuff in like a common sense way, which is like, I hear a lot of things that I would generally support, and I get into these Twitter battles sometimes with people where I'm like, yeah, that sounds awful. We should probably regulate that substance. Like, there's not enough research to suggest we should actually move to Schedule 3. And it's like, yeah, no shit. That's why we should move it to Schedule 3 and research it.
Exactly.
Or it's like, man, that product sounds like kids shouldn't get access. We should probably have rules in place that prevent that.
Yeah.
I don't know, with a law and regulations and businesses that can be held accountable for kids getting access. And then I hear about stuff where it's like regulate it like alcohol. And then I just saw today, there's like a restaurant in Boston, I think, that had their liquor license suspended because it was like a wine bar that was pouring wine into kids' mouths at a party. And I'm like, man, we maybe shouldn't regulate like alcohol exactly because, but then I think about there's a license that can be suspended there. Like an agency that regulates this took action and actually did something. But yeah, Erik, I'm glad your reaction to that was like, that's rich coming from the prohibitionists to suggest that we shouldn't have a regulatory scheme to protect against the very harms that we're going to try to fearmonger into voters' minds. And
you think their core messaging or their talking points would be a little bit more finessed than taking a position that's in contrast with their own position. It should say, again, trying to be respectful and not be rude here because they do have.
They're not coming on this podcast. They're not a future guest.
It should be like yes on one because we just don't like weed, right? Like
that's it.
Yeah, that's what it kind of boils down to.
I'm grumpy, I'm a curmudgeon,
which is almost a good thing though for the work, Ryan, that you're doing and your operators are doing because they're putting you in a position where it's very easy to combat some of these talking points. It's just again getting out to the reach, making sure your messaging is almost customized to the voter group that you're talking to. Obviously, if you're talking to like concerned parent. It's different than if you're talking to an adult use consumer at a dispensary. But yeah, I think you have a ripe opportunity here to kind of set the record straight and have that education component better inform the voters and hopefully have a great result in November. So sorry, I thought I was going to hear something a little bit different than what you said, and that's when I kind of I got a little
I know
it's all
the tried and true prohibition in this argument, like you said, Shawn and Erik. Yeah, exactly. So I think that's the thing is like there's nothing new in terms of their approach here. I think the only other that I've heard and like I've gone on some local radio shows and callers come in and like their biggest complaint is like the smell of cannabis and like why do I smell it on the street? Why like it's different from alcohol? Like I never see like that many people just drinking on the street, etc. And I think this goes back to the point where we have a law that's coming online with social consumption licenses that will give people a safe place to use cannabis. And like, if you just give it time, we're still a very new industry. We will get there with some of these types of issues. And so I think if I can get, the general populace and voters to understand, like, we are moving in the right direction. Every year, I think our regulations are getting stronger. We're seeing the enforcement that we're hoping for. And hopefully with the rescheduling that's going to happen, we're going to get the right research and data that we can build policy off of, because I think both sides are just, leaning into like some of the research that's out there that may be a little bit flawed, or like the data and the reports that are out there. And so the only way we can do it is if we expand, not necessarily try to take it away and drive everybody back into the illicit market. Because, the person behind the CVS is not going to care if the person's under 21 or what's in their products, et cetera. And I think what we've shown in Massachusetts is that there is growing demand for our cannabis products. There's been like every year we're hitting new highs in terms of how many people are buying cannabis products. And I think that just shows that demand's not just going to go away if we remove adult use. We're just going to move it into a different area.
And you're seeing these questions too, like to get back into what the prohibitionists are going to say or what the Yes campaign is going to say. It is things like youth access. And I think the research, those states that have taken the effort to actually do some baseline research and compare it to before and after legalization, youth access has actually declined in most jurisdictions,
right.
If not all, to my knowledge. You will see reports about kids in the ERs and in ER visits. And I would just ask, again, is it your regulated market that made that available to the child, or was it a parent who just happened to leave it out and made a mistake? And obviously, both of those are circumstances that should be looked into, because there is still education about safe storage and how to keep it away from kids. But there's also personal responsibility embedded into that. And your legal market is doing its part with things like public education campaigns and labels that say things like keep away from children, and actually are required to have symbols on their products. And back to the product itself too, is we talked about the potency stuff, and it's like, yeah, we need to get that dialed in. And there's also a market that seems to be gravitating toward, say higher potency flower, but there's still education to be done on products themselves and what a terpene is and what the entire cannabinoid profile is. The market, I think, long-term benefits from that. You're also going to see things about calls to poison control. And that one is the one that really pisses me off, because we literally require the phone number to poison control to be on the label in Massachusetts. So we should be, I don't want to say proud when people make that phone call, but it shows that the label worked. And if someone had an unpleasant experience, there's something that obviously should be followed up on that. But it also means that they were willing to call a phone number and say, I consumed marijuana and I'm having, a reaction. That means the label is working, but we're also removing or reducing the stigma. Because before, when you called poison control, you were admitting to drug use. And then it opened up a whole different can of worms. And so when they say that calls have increased, that's an area where I think in a number of different directions, good people are using the resource that's available to them. I'm glad they're calling to get that assistance. But also they got the phone number from the label of the product.
Kudos to you, Shawn Collins. I've never thought about that before. That is a really good point.
But like that, the label's working. But again, I think the stigma piece is the most important too, because even if you show up to an ER It was like, well, what did you take? Oh, marijuana. Okay. So that's a illegal substance. Like there was some judgment there. I think the fact that people are presenting and sharing the fact that they are accessing a legal product just shows me that the stigma itself is seeing some, hopefully reduction, if not removal. And then lastly is I'll just say, we should definitely talk about social equity and the impact of all that work that we've done in Massachusetts, where we have a ton of pride on the ballot question. And, Ryan, as you indicated, there was like one line in the ballot question, and then the statute that got rewritten still had a lot of filling in to do. But that work that's been filled in has been done by, I would say, the commission, and then through the commission, licensees and advocates. And as someone who's taken a lot of pride in the fact that we did breathe some life into that concept, to gut that in the way that this would, I think it's just devastating. But also, unfortunately, for a lot of folks that are finally starting to trust government, like, I'm the government, I'm here to help. Like, there's actually work getting done there. And to just see that taken away is just like, I don't know from a credibility standpoint how you rebuild any trust that's been re-earned. And that work has been sincere, and to just see it at risk is, again, would just be devastating. So.
Yeah. And with the social equity program specifically, I think, now that we've been in it for a few years, I think we've always heard about social equity not having access to capital. And now we have a social equity trust fund that is getting out about $30 million per year into social equity licensees' hands so that they can actually get across the finish line and open their doors. Or if they're already in the market, to help them to become financially viable, just give them a chance to keep their doors open, or even scale up for some of the lucky ones. And so for us to remove that fund, we're actually going to be, devastating a lot of small social equity businesses that have been impacted by the war on drugs. Their communities have been impacted by the war on drugs. And I think there's this misconception that, hey, this is all getting pushed by big marijuana. Like, big marijuana is like running this campaign. Big marijuana is the one that is, kind of pushing this forward in Massachusetts. But the way Massachusetts program was set up with these license caps, et cetera, it's so that some of the local small mom and pop shops can actually exist and be successful. And I do think, again, 80-90% of the market are some of these smaller operators. And so we are going to devastate a lot of local families who have invested in these businesses. And so, there's a lot of things that I think people are not really thinking about when it comes to the total impact that we're going to have here if we repeal adult use cannabis.
Right. All of the good thing that has been built in Massachusetts, all of the good work that you've done, all of these good things go away in the end. But no, excuse me, hopefully they don't go away in the end. Yeah. My question is back to the campaign side, because I find we haven't had this type of conversation on the podcast yet. And coming from the campaign world another lifetime ago, it's exciting to talk about. So my question in that aspect is, and I don't want you to give away any proprietary information or like strategic information what I mean? But are there particular groups in Massachusetts? Are there particular regions? Are there particular, I don't know, groups or regions where you think are going to be really important that are going to determine the selection that you guys are hyper focused on? Or is it more we're painting with a broad brush, the education piece, and we think we have the support that we need in order to be successful if we take that approach?
Yeah, I think without giving out too much, I think you will see that there's a lot of cities and towns in Massachusetts that still outlaw cannabis from being in their communities, whether that's a licensee or a delivery operator to even deliver into their city and town. I think those are where we need to do a lot of education in terms of convincing folks who are already against cannabis that we're actually working. The things that Shawn was talking about of like enforcement, that means that the system is working, etc. And so I think we have to just kind of go to them and make them realize that all of their fears coming into this, all of that stigma wasn't realized 10 years later. And so trying to convince them that, hey, it's just actually going to make it worse if we repeal adult use cannabis. So I think those are some of the communities that we're focused on, but I do think that this is going to be a statewide effort. It's already going to be a low voter turnout because it's a non-presidential election year. We have a few races like with the governor's race, the Senate race, but they're not very competitive. I don't know if they're going to be a big draw for voters come November. And so, I think it's one of these things that it's risky for us to just focus on one like area or community. And I think we have to go as wide as we possibly can.
And I would say too that that's not an accident as well from a proponent standpoint. So a lot of the things that we've seen happen in this ballot campaign to date have really swirled around like Sam's strategy and some of their tactics. And I would just, for folks listening, like if you know Sam, like you know that they're capable of twisting or bending the truth. You know that they're very strategic. They're also, it's funny, I've paid close attention to the Senate, the U.S. Senate over the weekend and their work around intoxicating hemp and or just the hemp definition. And so Sam is very involved in that conversation. If you're following rescheduling, Sam is very involved in that conversation. So they're a pretty known nemesis of the legalization effort and the industry overall. But some of that is also some shady tactics and manipulation of again, information. And so if you're following Sam and rescheduling nationally, I would advise you to zoom in and look at Massachusetts as well, because there's some trial balloons as far as the arguments that they're going to make. And some of it is also like they say one thing out of one side of their mouth and another thing out of the other, which is like, we want there to be strict rules in place. We want there to be, strong enforcement. But you get that with legalization. You don't get that with prohibition. And so again, back to the vote yes, vote no, I think there's some very convenient arguments that they're going to make that people just shouldn't fall for. And the reason I say fall for, though, is because they were absolutely accused of fraud in getting their signatures, which was they were accused and people came forward and acknowledged, I would not have signed if not for what the person told me, which was, don't you think we should have, this would clean up, expungement or record sealing, and it would, create a social equity program. Oh, yeah, sure. That sounds great. Or, this would support medical marijuana and support medical patients. Sure. Why would I be against that? I'll sign. And so that's how they got to the ballot. And then, even on the campaign side, they're going to tell you that the legal market is responsible for kids going to the ER. What I just told you, again, back to listeners, is that that's not true. Or that, kids are, they're finding stuff in schools and kids are getting access or like remember the like Pop Tarts in like Keef Cats and like all these different candy packages, and your legal market does not create those products. Those products still exist if a legal market doesn't. So again, I just want to frame it as like, this is not a bunch of local Massachusetts citizens that came forward and said the market is a problem. This is a full-fledged national campaign from people who would rather not see a market exist. And you have to question why. Like, what is their interest in this? And maybe that's when we do have them on as like a giant expose on who Sam is and what they really represent. But just keep in mind that this is not some folks just clenching their pearls in Massachusetts. This is a well-heeled, well-funded scheme.
And that brings up a really interesting point. Like, this isn't coming from our residents in Massachusetts. It's coming from an outside organization that funded an outside signature gathering company out of Florida that had some questionable kind of tactics and has been, accused of these types of tactics, not just in Massachusetts, but nationwide in many different states. And they don't have any, real campaign that's happening on the ground here in Massachusetts. There aren't a group of residents that are coming out and saying, hey, I want you to understand why we're pushing for this. It's really all about misinformation, deception, and trying to confuse the voters on what this question actually does to get you vote in the wrong direction. And so I think that's kind of the challenge that we're going to be facing. And I do think it's something for the rest of the country to kind of take note of. I think, they started in Massachusetts. I don't know if it was symbolic with us being the first on the East Coast to legalize adult use cannabis, or if it actually was easier than maybe what we initially thought to get on the ballot. I think when we saw Arizona and some of those talks happening of them trying it out there, they had almost 4 times as many signatures that they have to gather, like 288,000 is what I've heard. And like in Maine, for example, they push it off until next year to see what's going to happen here in Massachusetts. And so
that's what they did with the legal market too, right, Erik? They pushed it off for a year to see what we would do. Is that how you rolled out your market too?
Just being a gentleman. Just being a gentleman. Let you go first.
Very courteous. Yeah.
Exactly. And so, we're the warning signal, you know what I mean, for the rest of the country. Like, they are trying certain things here. They got on the ballot successfully. They're going to try certain messaging, and that all becomes a playbook for them to use in Maine next year when they do it again. In some of these states that are trying to convert from medical to adult use, if they remove adult use in Massachusetts, what do you think is going to happen in Pennsylvania or Florida? Do you think they're ever going to be able to now convert over to adult use? Same thing with some of these other states like Ohio, or even when we're looking at the global South that didn't want it from the get-go. And so it's something that should be a concern for everybody. And again, we're the testing ground for all of that, and we're going to try to defeat them as much as possible so that maybe there's such a big margin that they don't, try to take it to another state. But I do think that this is just a start, and I do see it as a coordinated effort between some of their federal fight against rescheduling against hemp, as well as trying to do it on the state level.
I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, I was going to ask, why do we think Massachusetts first? I mean, we never really know unless we were part of the Yes campaign, but I think probably access to the ballot. You have a long-standing program with good visibility. It is a trial case. I was going to ask, what does this mean for other states? But I think we have an understanding, like, it doesn't stop at Massachusetts. They've already tried to get on ballots in other states. They've already messaged that they're going to be going to get on ballots in other states next year and the year after. So we know that this is not like a siloed event. This is not just a Massachusetts specific thing. It's this national movement where they're dropping into states and kind of trying to move things backwards. But this is an honest question for Ryan, you, but also Shawn, because I can't quite understand, what is the end game here for Sam and these Yes on One? They have to know or be realistic in the sense, like, we're not going to backtrack legalization in the X number of states that already done it. What are they trying to gain from these efforts? Or what do you think? What is your opinion? Is it just getting traction that maybe they can pick off one or two? Is it to impact all of the work and conversations that are happening at DC? Is it just to be a barrier in the progress that's being made as a whole in this conversation nationally? I honestly don't know. What do we think it is? What do you think a win for Sam is in this regard?
Yeah. So I think in Massachusetts, it's like, can we even get close here? And can we convince one of these like seemingly liberal progressive states to kind of roll back something that they passed through a voter initiative? And so, I think that probably helps them with their fundraising to like go and do it in other states, and then also try to push it further on the federal level. So that's probably what I would say is like the number one motivation behind this is like their fundraising.
Fundraising, great. Yeah, good.
Yeah, exactly.
So of course
they need more money. Yeah.
I'm kind of glad Ryan went there, because in my head I'm like, man, I'm like, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, and I think I do think it is fundraising. I think selfishly, it's like momentum means fundraising, and so there's an end game there. And some of it is because there's, I think, a starvation for a relevance. The more marijuana becomes mainstream and sort of, whether it be state by state and or federally, the less organizations like Sam have reason to exist. And so part of it, I think, is just selfish, like existence and future, which is, like Ryan said, if we can get close in Massachusetts, that's really good for fundraising, because then I can put up a fight in Ohio. Then I can put up a fight in Pennsylvania. Then I can also go to a vulnerable member of Congress in a swing district and say, you'd think marijuana is popular, but look at Massachusetts. And so keep in mind, 10 years ago, it was, I think, a 54-46 split. Anything within that sort of margin, I think Sam declares victory and says, we moved the needle in Massachusetts. I would argue that I think sentiment locally has turned in a different direction, which is I think it's far more popular. But I just wonder when people get to question 8.
Well, that's a good point in talking about their strategy too, like why Massachusetts. So if that's what we think the win is for them and why that would be a win for them, then Massachusetts, you're talking access to ballot, like 80,000 is a lot, but doable. You're talking about 9
And
ballot
viable.
questions. You're talking about, Ryan, you brought up there are not these high profile, really close elections happening. So turnout could be down where in theory, like if you were to get everybody in Massachusetts to vote, it's a presidential, there's 1 or 2 ballot questions. They get 20% of the vote and then it cuts the opposite way. Like good luck fundraising off of that. So they're just hoping all these things work in their favor to where they could maybe sniff a number that donors may think is worth continuing to contribute to.
I would just say this to establish sort of a perspective, because you just sort of allowed me to imagine in my head like who Sam is, which is like everything. If you are the average voter, everything you hate about politics, Sam literally is. Which is like, you don't like dark money being in politics. Where's Sam get their funding? Like, you don't want special interests sort of pushing their philosophy on you. Sam exists to push a philosophy, which is drugs bad. And when I say drugs, like that's, again, like cannabis is skewing far more closer to therapeutic sort of mainstream medicine, as opposed to like fentanyl and other sort of like really dangerous things that are actually plaguing communities, neighborhoods, etc., families. If you don't sort of like the shady characters and like, you know, the Washington elites, like that's literally Sam's board. Like Bill Barr, the former U.S. Attorney General under Trump, is their lawyer in D.C.
Mm-hmm.
So what I would say is like everything that, if you look at like get these things out of politics, Sam is like, there's sort of the poster child for that. And then again, like they could give 2 shits about you and your neighborhood because they're off to the next state after this to sort of fight that fight. But they're very much pushing their philosophy on people. And I think that's, whereas I'll just point out on the no side of this campaign that Ryan and his team are representing, you've literally got small businesses. Like you've literally got local brands. I think about like Coast out of Wareham. Like they're growing into other states through licensing deals and everything else. But that brand originated in Massachusetts. They're one of the premier edibles companies in the country. Brands like Fernway, like that is doing really interesting things around vapes and vape cartridges, recycling of vape cartridges. Tree Works, which are like some of the best extracts and tinctures, and then like retail side, you've got like a Caroline's Cannabis, you've got Haverhill Stem, like all these sort of like a Bud's Goods, like all these local brands that I think are really integrating with their community up and down the supply chain. A Paper Crane that's growing again like reputable, notable flower. Those are all Massachusetts-based people that grew up in Massachusetts doing work on like. They're hiring their neighbors. They're like, that's your industry. And like Sam would want you to basically make sure that they can't make their mortgage payment in 6 months and that they lose their family's investment. And I think that juxtaposition is all the reason people need to really just vote no. Right? Like again, sort of framing it like, if you're voting yes, you're voting against all those people I just named. And they're your neighbors and they employ your neighbors. Their kids are in school with your kids.
Yeah. So, I mean, this hits at the human and community level. I mean, I think at the end of the day, that's kind of where my brain goes to it. And then Ryan, trying to be cognizant of your time too. We've gone over an hour. What our listeners are like, regulators, ex-regulators, industry, ancillary groups. What does your work need between right now or right when they're listening?
Yeah.
In election day?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is we need everybody, whether you're in Massachusetts or not, to be spreading the word about this as a real threat, not just to our market, but to markets across the country. This is an attack on our values, on our, decision making of the voters to legalize cannabis. And so I think the best thing that people can do is spread the word, whether that's on social media, to your family members. Sign our pledge that you will vote no on 8 come November. You can do that on our website, which is noon8ma.com. That's noon8ma.com. And then also, again, every dollar counts for this campaign. So we're getting, folks from MPPs kind of like mailing list that are sending in $5 or $20. And we have, little small businesses that are giving us, a few thousand out of like scrounging it up from like what they can make. And so I think we really need every resource that we can. And if you're located here in Massachusetts, make sure that you go out and you get our materials and you hand them out to all of your patients and customers. You educate them, and then all of the community events that you're in, make sure you have No on 8 materials so folks outside of our industry can really understand the threat that we're facing right now.
Erik, what
Yeah.
other questions do you have about what is at stake in Massachusetts here in November?
Well, I think I have a pretty firm understanding of what's at stake. We covered that. And I'm just thankful, Ryan, that you're in Massachusetts doing that work, leading that effort, educating the voters of Massachusetts on the real impact of a yes vote. I'm glad you got the website plug. I'm glad you had a call to action for people in Massachusetts, but not in Massachusetts. I will go online and sign up for that. I guess maybe
And how
my
much
last
are you pledging today?
I guess
Erik?
maybe my last. I guess I'll send you a check. I guess my last question would be like, again, what the final note or talking point for folks like me, listeners that are having that important conversations with their friend, family member, neighbor, colleague that is an undecided voter in this regard. What would be, how would you want them to communicate to them why a no vote is where they should check that box come November?
Yeah. And again, I think it touches on what Shawn was saying. The cannabis industry isn't just kind of a siloed industry of riffraff per se. Like, these are, again, like your brothers, your mothers, your sisters, et cetera, who are patients and customers, but also employees of this industry. So think about the 20,000 plus jobs that are getting employed in the cannabis industry. Think about the $300 million in tax revenue every year that's going to your city and town and your state programs that are helping you live the life that you want to live in Massachusetts. And then also think about all of the investment that has gone into these small businesses. This is the life savings, the 401ks of everybody in your community. And so if you take this away, there's no recourse for them, especially when they don't have federal bankruptcy protections and the like.
Exactly. Yeah,
good answer.
Ryan, thank you for coming on and talking about this today. I'm glad we were able to give you the space and opportunities or the platform, whatever it might be. We're not quite sure how many people listen to this, but hopefully more after you've been on as well. So thank you for sort of leveraging and lending that to us, because I think conversations like this are exactly why Erik and I, I think got involved in cannabis policy to begin with, is to set rules in place and make sure that this was a safe industry. And we're proud of the work that we did as regulators to do that. And we're also proud of the industry that has emerged under those rules and continues to exist today. And like you said, the environment is that, there is investment happening. There is downtown revitalization happening. There is active employment happening. And all those things happen in a regulated environment. All those things, safe product gets produced and sold in a regulated environment. Kids don't get access in a regulated environment. And so for all the reasons, if you are skeptical of legalization, it's actually a reason to vote for it. If you are, concerned about youth access, then you should vote for a legal industry, because that's what also is concerned about it. And so rules exist when there are regulations, when there's statutes that need to be followed, and enforcement exists when people break those rules. And that should be our expectation for government, is that if the people vote in favor of a legal industry, that it is done safely, it is done responsibly. And again, I think Erik and I are proud of the work that we did, and also proud of the work that our colleagues continue to do across the country to ensure that that's the case. But then I also think about, selfishly, the work that's been done for social equity. And I think about the fact that prohibition is an abject policy failure when it comes to the scourge it's sort of inflicted on communities and neighborhoods and families and on real people. And to go backwards in that, I think, is the wrong signal to send. And so again, if you are agnostic about the legal industry, but think that prohibition sucks and people going to jail for weed is wrong, then there's another reason to vote no in November. So again, there should be incentive for any perspective to vote no and really ensure a legal market. Just don't get duped. Don't get fooled by those that are very much intending to dupe you, because they don't give a shit about Massachusetts. They're going to pick up and move there. It's like a circus that comes to town and then goes somewhere else afterwards. Don't fall for it is sort of my advice. But again, Ryan, thank you so much for joining us. And just so our listeners can be reminded, if you want to plug the website, especially, and how folks can get involved, again, we want to make sure we're able to leave our listeners with that. But also, we'd love to have you back on at some point as we get closer to November, do a check-in, but also look forward to having you back on after November to talk about the future of this industry as well in Massachusetts, and especially what MCC's priorities are and will be moving forward. Because as a former regulator in Massachusetts, I am very grateful that you exist, because talking through a trade association would have been very helpful to me as a regulator. And so I'm glad that your work has led to the success you found. But again, if you want to give our listeners a plug for where they can learn more, just I'll come back and maybe land this bird.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Shawn and Erik, again, for the platform. Again, we want everybody to get involved, sign our pledge to vote no come November, and you can find all of that information as well as where to volunteer and donate on our website, which is no18ma.com, no18ma.com.
All right. Thanks, Ryan. Thank you, Erik. Any parting thoughts or?
No, Ryan, thanks for coming on. I feel like you provided a safe space for Shawn. It seemed like therapy for Shawn. There was a lot, like Shawn loves his soapbox moments. He loves his soapbox moments. There were a lot of them today, but I thought it was great, Shawn. Yeah. So Ryan, thank you for your time. Best of luck moving forward. Shawn and I will reach out behind the scenes to see what we can do to be of assistance in any way, shape, or form. So best of luck to you, your team, and looking forward to celebrating with you come November.
Yeah, come November. And then after that, let's talk about better days and like how we make the program better. So
Amen.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks everybody for listening to the Hybrid Podcast. You can get us anywhere you get your podcast. That's Spotify, YouTube, Apple, Amazon, you name it. We are available there. And as always, if you find our content to be helpful, like and share and do all the things that you're supposed to do. And we will also put the messaging and other materials for the No on 8 campaign in Massachusetts on our social media and push our folks there as well, and make sure that people know where to access and support Ryan and all the folks doing great work in Massachusetts in our cannabis industry. So again, thank you for listening. And I guess in this instance, vote no on 8 in November. Thanks, everybody.
No.
The hybrid.